My name is Heidi, I'm 34 years old, and I never thought an empty plate could start a war. The moment is burned into my mind. At my mother-in-law's long, polished mahogany dining table, 23 guests watched as servers set down perfect cuts of filet mignon. But they passed right by me. In front of me sat nothing but a lonely nest of greens, my empty plate a spotlight shining on my humiliation. When my husband's Aunt Margot asked why, my mother-in-law, Vivian, offered a thin, cool smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes and still chills me to the bone, and said, "Oh, I only ordered for family." They thought they were humiliating some girl from Ohio. They had no idea they were declaring war on Captain Miller of the United States Army, a woman trained to stay calm with an enemy's gun in her face. If you're watching this video and you have ever been made to feel small, please hit that like button and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, as I tell you what happened when I finally stood up to the woman who never saw me as family. Vivian's words were a poisoned dart, and they found their mark. The cheerful sound of sterling silver forks tapping against bone, china died instantly. The warm, inviting scent of rosemary and garlic from the filet mignon suddenly felt heavy and suffocating in the dead air. It was a complete, crushing silence. The kind that's so thick you feel it pressing in on you. I could feel 23 pairs of eyes turn to me, a collective stare that felt like a physical touch. They weren't looking with compassion. It was a morbid, fascinated curiosity. The way drivers slow down to gawk at an accident on the side of the road. I was the spectacle. My first instinct was to look for my husband, Derek, the man who stood with me on a sun-drenched afternoon and promised to be my partner, my defender, my family. He wouldn't meet my gaze. He was staring down at his plate with a focus so intense you'd think he was trying to solve a complex puzzle. His face was flushed a deep, embarrassed red that crept up from his collar, and his hand, clutching his fork, had a slight but noticeable tremor. He prodded a single, slender spear of asparagus, pushing it from one side of his plate to the other, as if its journey was the only thing in the world that mattered. His silence was a betrayal far deeper than Vivian's cruelty. It was a public verdict. In front of his entire family and their influential friends, he was telling me, without saying a word, that he had chosen his side. And it wasn't with me. In that moment, watching him torment that poor piece of asparagus, I felt the lifeblood of our marriage drain away, soaking invisibly into the pristine Italian linen tablecloth. Just when I thought the silence would break me, a single voice cut through it. "Heidi, dear, please, have mine. I find I'm not very hungry tonight." It was Aunt Margot, his father's younger sister. She was a woman with kind, crinkling eyes and a warmth that felt entirely out of place in this cold, polished room. With a quiet grace, she slid her plate, the perfect medium-rare steak still sizzling slightly, across the polished mahogany towards me. Vivian's head whipped around, her eyes locking onto Margot. The look she gave her was a weapon, sharp and cold. "Margot," she said, her voice a low, dangerous purr that was meant to be heard by everyone. "Don't spoil the evening." But Margot's small rebellion had already done its work. Her simple act of kindness was a flare in the darkness, a signal that reminded me of a truth I'd nearly forgotten in my isolation. I wasn't entirely alone. That single gesture gave me the strength to pull myself back from the edge. Something inside me clicked into place. The searing pain that had been rising in my chest, the kind that usually dissolves into hot, helpless tears, didn't break. It solidified. It cooled and hardened into something dense and unyielding, like steel. In that instant, the accommodating daughter-in-law, the girl from Ohio so desperate for their approval, simply ceased to exist. Captain Miller of the U.S. Army took her place. The years of training I'd tried so hard to suppress in this world of passive aggression and unspoken social codes came roaring to the surface. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of hurt and humiliation, became sharp and clear. I started running through the OIDA loop, a combat doctrine drilled into us at Fort Bragg. Observe, orient, decide, act. Observe. The environment is a hostile dinner party in Greenwich, Connecticut. The opposing commander, Vivian, has launched a direct psychological assault. My primary ally, my husband, has abdicated his role and failed to provide support. The mission objective of the opposition is my public humiliation and forced surrender. Orient. The enemy's greatest weakness is her arrogance. She sees me as an emotional, unsophisticated outsider. She expects a scene, tears, yelling, a dramatic exit. My greatest asset is my discipline, an element she hasn't factored into her calculations. My composure is a weapon she won't see coming. Decide. I will not engage the enemy on her chosen ground. I will not give her the satisfaction of the emotional reaction she craves. This is a strategic withdrawal, not a defeat. I will disengage, regroup, and select a new time and place for the counter-assault, one of my own choosing. Act. I drew a slow, deliberate breath, holding it for a count of 4, just like we were taught to do before rifle qualification. It steadied my hands. I reached for the heavy crystal water glass, its faceted surface cool against my skin. I took a small, controlled sip. Then I lifted my chin and looked directly across the table, my eyes locking with Vivian Harrington's. And then I smiled. It wasn't a real smile. It was a carefully constructed expression, a calm, measured curve of the lips that held no warmth at all. It was the smile of a strategist, not a victim. "That's quite all right," I said, my voice steady and clear, projecting easily across the silent room. "I'm on a new diet. Thank you for being so considerate, Vivian." I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. The triumphant smirk on her face faltered, replaced by a subtle tightening around her mouth. She had prepared her battlefield for a hysterical woman, not a calm soldier. My refusal to play my assigned part had thrown her off balance. But this was my new mission. I was no longer trying to win their love. I was planning to win the war. As I glanced around the table at the curious, uncomfortable faces, a single, heavy question settled in my mind. How did I, a captain in the U.S. Army, trained to read a battlefield and anticipate an enemy's moves, walk so blindly into a trap this personal and this brutal? To understand that, we have to go back to the very beginning. To understand how I ended up sitting at that table, a soldier frozen in place, you have to understand that the empty plate wasn't the first shot fired in this war. It was just the first one the whole world got to see. The battle had been going on for years, a quiet, grinding campaign of psychological warfare, and it all began on the night of our engagement dinner. I remember picking out my dress for that evening. It was a simple, elegant navy blue sheath from Ann Taylor, the nicest thing I owned. I felt confident in it. I was a successful speech pathologist, I had built my own practice from the ground up, and I was in love with a wonderful man. I thought that would be enough. I was naive. The moment I walked into the Harringtons' house in Greenwich, I felt like I was back in my dress blues, standing for a surprise inspection I couldn't possibly pass. Vivian didn't ask about my work with children who have speech impediments. She didn't ask about my tour in Afghanistan, even though Derek had proudly told her I was a captain. Her first real question to me, after a glacial hello, was, "Heidi dear, do you know the difference between a salad fork and a fish fork?" She asked it with a serene smile, as if she were simply making conversation about the weather. Later, as we sat down to a dinner that was more intimidating than any formal military function I'd ever attended, she turned her focus to my family. "And where did you say you grew up, dear?" "Ohio," I said, my voice steady. "Just outside of Cleveland." "Oh, lovely," she replied, though her tone suggested it was anything but. "And your parents, what do they do?" "My dad was a delivery truck driver for 30 years, I said, a wave of pride washing over me. "And my mom was a secretary at an elementary school." Vivian's smile widened, but it never reached her eyes. She placed her hand on Derek's arm. "How sweet," she murmured, loud enough for the whole table to hear. Derek has always had such a soft spot for the less fortunate. Derek gave a short, awkward laugh, and the conversation moved on. But I sat there, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks, suddenly feeling less like a fiancé and more like my son's latest charity project. That night, I was also formally introduced to the ghost who would haunt our marriage, Julia. Art gallery director, senator's daughter. Perfect. Vivian never missed an opportunity to conjure her. When I'd show up to a family brunch with my hair pulled back in a neat, practical bun, a habit from my time in the service, Vivian would sigh wistfully. "Julia has the most wonderful blowout," she'd remark to no one in particular. "So much body." When I ordered a Sam Adams at a casual family barbecue, Vivian would raise a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Julia has such a sophisticated palate for French wines," she'd say, swirling her own glass of Chardonnay. Derek, bless his heart, was blind to it all. "Mom doesn't mean anything by it," he'd insist later, when I'd gently try to explain how it made me feel. "That's just how she is. Give her time. She'll grow to love you." But I knew better. Julia wasn't just an ex-girlfriend, she was Vivian's weapon of choice. The perfect, polished ghost she used to remind me that I would never, ever measure up. And the worst part was, I didn't even want to be her. But the most painful attacks weren't her words. They were her actions. The Harrington living room was dominated by a massive, white marble fireplace, and the mantel above it was a carefully curated museum of their family's history. There were photos of Derek's christening, his graduation from Yale, his father's business achievements, his sister's wedding. Every major milestone was there, framed in ornate silver. But our wedding photo was conspicuously absent. When I finally got up the nerve to ask why, Vivian waved a dismissive hand and said, "Oh, the composition just didn't quite fit the overall aesthetic, dear." Another time, I walked into the family room and felt a jolt. On a small end table, where a framed portrait of me from our engagement shoot used to sit, there was now a new picture. A photo of Derek, beaming, with his arm around Sunny, the family's aging golden retriever. I'd been systematically, quietly, and completely erased from the visual history of the family I was trying so desperately to join. The breaking point, the moment my hope finally started to die, came on our first Thanksgiving as a married couple. We lived in North Carolina, near Fort Bragg, so visiting his family in Connecticut was an 8-hour drive. We packed the car, brought a homemade pecan pie and a nice bottle of wine, and battled holiday traffic all the way up I-95. We were exhausted, but excited. When we finally pulled into the long, winding driveway, the house was dark. Completely dark and silent. We stood on the grand front porch, a cold November wind whipping around us, and that's when Derek's phone buzzed. It was an email from his mother. She informed him that the whole family had decided, on a whim, to fly to St. Bart's for the holiday. "It was all so last minute, darling," the email read. "I completely forgot to tell you. Hope you two have a lovely Thanksgiving." We stood there, in the chilling twilight, two forgotten soldiers on the doorstep of an empty, silent mansion. That night, in a sterile guest room that didn't even have a picture on the wall, I cried for the first time since we were married. I wasn't crying over a missed vacation. I was crying for the death of a dream. The dream that my love and my effort could ever be enough to earn me a place in this family. Derek held me as I sobbed, and he promised, with tears in his own eyes, that he would finally have a serious talk with his mother. He promised he would make her understand. But he never did. His silence became a wall between us, brick by brick, excuse by excuse. And as I lay awake that night, listening to the wind rattle the windows of that big, empty house, I began to wonder, how could I ever escape this gilded cage? The weeks following that disastrous Thanksgiving bled into a gray, monotonous winter. I found myself retreating, building emotional fortifications around myself. The weekend trips to Connecticut became less frequent, citing work or exhaustion as an excuse. I was seriously considering putting in a request for a transfer, maybe to a base in Germany, or even Korea. Anything to put an ocean between myself and the suffocating chill of the Harrington family. I felt adrift, my sense of self slowly being eroded by 1,000 tiny cuts. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, it arrived. Tucked in with the usual junk mail and bills was a crisp, cream-colored envelope. In the top left corner, embossed in navy blue ink, was the official seal of the Department of Defense. My heart hammered against my ribs. An official DoD envelope usually meant one thing: deployment orders. I carried it inside, my hands slightly trembling, and sat down at our small kitchen table before carefully slitting it open. But it wasn't orders. It was an invitation. My eyes scanned the formal, typewritten words, my brain struggling to process what I was reading. I had been selected. Out of a pool of hundreds of highly qualified officers, I had been chosen to be a keynote speaker at the annual Defense Leadership Conference in Washington, D.C. They had read an after-action report I had co-authored on strategic operations and wanted me to speak on the topic: Strategy and Compassion, the Modern Female Leader on the Battlefield. It was an unbelievable honor. This wasn't some minor workshop. This was one of the most prestigious events of the year, attended by the military's top brass. It was a level of professional recognition I had only dreamed of. I didn't tell Derek right away. I needed a moment to let this victory be entirely my own. This joy felt too pure, too personal, to risk having it tainted by the complex filter of his family. I sat there in the quiet of our small apartment, the late afternoon sun streaming through the window, and I read the letter again and again. The heavy official paper felt solid and real in my hands. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't Derek's unsuitable wife. I wasn't Vivian's charity case. I was Captain Heidi Miller, a respected expert in my field. A forgotten strength began to rise up from deep within me, a sense of purpose that had been dormant for too long. This was my world. This was the world where your value was measured by your merit, your skill, and your contributions, not by the last name on your family tree. In that moment, I remembered the words of General Ann Dunwoody, the first woman to achieve a 4-star rank in the U.S. military. Your career is not defined by what others think of you, but by what you contribute. When I finally told Derek that evening, he was genuinely thrilled for me. His face lit up, and he wrapped me in a huge hug, lifting me off the floor. "Heidi, this is incredible," he said, his voice full of pride. "I knew you were amazing." His sincerity was a balm on my weary soul, a reminder of the man I'd fallen in love with. But even as I hugged him back, a small, cautious part of me held back. Was this pride strong enough to withstand the chilling judgment of his mother? Later that night, I overheard him on the phone, excitedly telling his parents the news. My heart warmed as I listened until I heard his tone shift, becoming more casual, more dismissive. "Yeah, it's in D.C. Yes, the Pentagon is involved. I'm not totally sure. It's some kind of conference or something." Some kind of conference or something. He'd done it again. Unconsciously, almost certainly without malice, he had downplayed my achievement. He had taken a national honor, a career-defining moment, and reduced it to a vague, unimportant something to make it more palatable for his parents. The familiar sting of disappointment was sharp and unwelcome. And that's when I made my decision. I went back to the letter, my mind now clear and focused. My eyes landed on the second page, the itinerary. It detailed a private black tie reception and dinner on the final night, exclusively for speakers and distinguished guests. The guest list included several prominent U.S. senators and a handful of high-ranking generals. It was an opportunity to network with some of the most influential leaders in the country. I folded the letter carefully. I would not mention this dinner to the Harringtons. I would tell them only about the speech. This would be my test. A secret test. Would they value my accomplishment enough to make the trip, to sit in an auditorium and listen to me speak about something I was passionate and knowledgeable about? Or would they dismiss it, just as Derek had, as some trivial event not worth their precious time? I would hold this detail, my ace in the hole, close to my vest. I know I can't be the one who's been in a situation like this, where you have to set a secret test for the people who are supposed to be on your team. If you're with me on this and you believe I'm doing the right thing, hit that like button to show your support and type the word "test" in the comments below. Let me know I'm not alone in this. I needed to know, once and for all, if there was any genuine respect for me in that family. Or if I would forever just be the girl from Ohio. I had to know what I was really fighting for. 2 weeks before the conference, I put my plan into motion. I waited until mid-morning on a Tuesday, a time I knew Vivian would be between her tennis lesson and her garden club meeting. I took a deep breath, dialed her number, and put on the most pleasant professional voice I could muster. "Hi, Vivian, it's Heidi," I began. I'm calling to formally invite you and Richard to my presentation in Washington, D.C. on the 15th. It would be such an honor to have family there. There was a distinct pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint, crisp rustle of paper like she was flipping through a thick, leather-bound calendar. "The 15th, you say?" she asked, her voice laced with a cool indifference. "Let me see. Oh, what a terrible shame. That's the date of the Greenwich Polo Club's annual charity auction. Richard and I simply can't miss it. It's the most important event of the season." The most important event of the season. A charity auction for polo horses was more important than a keynote address at the Pentagon. The results of my experiment were already coming in, clear and conclusive, but I had to see it through. "I understand it's an all-day event," I pressed, keeping my tone light. "But my speech is only scheduled for an hour in the afternoon. Perhaps you could fly down for that and still be back in time for the evening festivities." A dry, condescending chuckle came through the phone. It was a sound I had come to despise. "Oh, Heidi, you're so wonderfully naive," she said. "One doesn't just pop into an event like that. The whole point is the networking, being seen from the very beginning. It's about relationships, you understand. Anyway, best of luck with your little talk." And then she hung up. No questions about the topic, not a shred of curiosity, just a swift, clean dismissal. I didn't let the anger take over. I simply registered the data. Test Subject 1. Failed. Derek came home that evening looking predictably glum. He loosened his tie as he walked through the door and tossed his briefcase onto a chair. "So, Mom told me about the scheduling conflict," he said with a sigh. "You know how she is with those charity events. They're a big deal to her." He wasn't fighting for me. He wasn't even angry on my behalf. He was just accepting it, managing my expectations. I looked at him, my own husband, and felt a cold distance settle between us. "What about you, Derek?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. I had to know. "Will you be there?" He had the decency to look uncomfortable. He broke eye contact, busying himself with getting a glass of water from the kitchen. "Heidi, I'll have to see," he stammered, his back to me. "Work has just been insane lately. We're in the middle of a huge merger, and work." That was his excuse, not a polo match, but something just as hollow. I watched the man I had married, the man who had promised to be my partner, and for the first time, I didn't see love or strength. I saw a scared little boy, terrified of disappointing his mother, terrified of leaving the comfortable gilded cage he had been raised in. Test Subject 2. Failed. I sat on the couch in the deepening twilight, the silence of our apartment pressing in on me. The hope I had allowed myself to feel just a few days ago now felt foolish. The test wasn't about hoping they would pass. It was about confirming what I already knew to be true. Vivian's world of old money and social status had its own rigid hierarchy, and in it, a captain in the United States Army ranked somewhere below a prize-winning pony. And her son, my husband, was a willing citizen of that world. Just as I was sinking into that cold, lonely feeling, my phone rang, its sudden chime startling me. I glanced at the screen. It was Aunt Margot. I almost let it go to voicemail, not feeling up to another difficult conversation, but something made me answer. "Heidi." "I just got off the phone with Vivian," she began, her voice a whirlwind of indignation. "I cannot believe her. I'm so sorry." I didn't know what to say. "It's okay, Margot. I understand." "No, it is not okay," she insisted, her warmth and fire a stark contrast to the cold dismissals I'd received all day. "You do not let them make you feel small. What you're doing is important. It's honorable. Your Uncle William and I are coming. He said he would much rather listen to a brilliant army officer speak than watch a bunch of rich men brag about their horses." Tears sprang to my eyes, hot and sudden. "And Heidi," she added, her voice softening. "I've already booked the flights. We'll be in the front row." That's when I broke. The tears weren't for the pain of Vivian's rejection or Derek's cowardice. They were tears of overwhelming, gut-wrenching gratitude. In the middle of my carefully constructed experiment, an unexpected variable had emerged. a piece of data I hadn't accounted for. My little drama was over. The results were in. And now I knew, with absolute certainty, who my real family was. The phone call came 3 days before my trip to DC. It was Derek, calling from the sterile quiet of his corner office at Harrington Investments. I could hear the artificial hum of the building's climate control in the background, a sound as cold and detached as his family. I knew instantly from his tone, that overly casual, carefully modulated voice he used when he was about to deliver bad news, that this was not going to be a pleasant conversation. "Hey, Heidi." "So, a small thing came up," he started, the words slightly rushed. "Mom just called me. She, needs a tiny favor." A warning bell, loud and clear, went off in my head. I sat down on the edge of our sofa, my back stiffening. Vivian Harrington did not ask for tiny favors. Her requests were strategic maneuvers, pieces moved on a chessboard I was only just beginning to understand. Each one was designed to test a weakness, demand a concession, or establish her dominance. "What kind of favor, Derek?" I asked, my voice already losing its warmth. He hesitated, and I could vividly picture him on the other end of the line, loosening his Hermes tie, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, stalling. "Well," he finally continued, "you know the polo auction this weekend? It seems one of the hostesses for the check-in table has come down with the flu. And Mom was wondering if you might be able to, you know, help out." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. I wanted him to hear the sheer absurdity of what he was saying. He pushed on, his voice becoming more strained. "Just for an hour or so, right at the beginning, to greet people and hand out the auction paddles. She said it would be a fantastic way for you to integrate and finally meet some of her friends in a more relaxed setting." My mind went blank for a second, short-circuiting from the raw audacity of it all. I, Captain Heidi Miller of the United States Army, an officer who had managed logistical operations for a battalion of over 500 soldiers, was being asked to hand out numbered sticks at a party. On the very same weekend I was scheduled to address the nation's top military leaders, my mother-in-law was offering me a volunteer position as event staff. It wasn't a favor. It was a calculated, masterfully cruel demotion. It was Vivian's way of broadcasting a message loud and clear. In my world, your world does not exist. Your rank, your career, your service, your entire identity is a quaint little hobby. Here, you are nothing more than the help. "What?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Did you say to her?" He faltered, and his voice dropped to a shameful mumble. I said I would ask you." He hadn't defended me. He hadn't told his mother how outrageously insulting her suggestion was. He hadn't felt that immediate, instinctive need to protect his wife's honor. He had simply accepted the mission from his commanding officer and relayed the message, becoming a willing accomplice in my humiliation. That was it. The final microscopic thread of hope I had that he might one day become his own man, my man, just dissolved. That evening, I walked into our apartment, my mind a storm of cold fury. I dropped my keys on the small entryway table and walked toward the bedroom, and that's when I saw it. I stopped dead in the hallway. The blood in my veins, which had been simmering all afternoon, began to boil. There, hanging from the polished brass hook on our bedroom closet door, was the evidence of Vivian's final, unforgivable declaration of war. She had sent over the uniform for the polo event, delivered by courier. It consisted of a flimsy, starched white apron that looked like it belonged in a 1950s diner, and a cheap, shiny black clip-on bow tie. And where, precisely, had this insulting costume been placed? Right next to my Army service uniform. My dress blues. The two uniforms hung side by side in the soft evening light, a diabolical and deeply symbolic display. On the right, the cheap, disposable costume of a servant, and on the left, the embodiment of my entire adult life. My dress blues weren't just fabric and thread, they were a living testament. The deep, midnight blue of the jacket represented the honor of the institution. The sky blue trousers, the legacy of the cavalry. Every gleaming brass button, every sharply pressed crease, Every colorful ribbon neatly arranged on my chest told a story of years of service, of deployments, of commendations, of sacrifices made in places Vivian couldn't even imagine. This was the uniform I had earned with my own sweat, my own blood, my own tears. It was the uniform I planned to wear with immense pride at the awards reception in Washington, D.C. It represented the very best of who I was. And Vivian had hung her cheap insult right beside it. She had, with this single contemptuous act, placed her opinion of me on the same level as my honor. It was a gesture so profoundly dismissive, so utterly disrespectful, it felt like a physical blow. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the two garments. One, a symbol of everything I had fought to become. The other, a symbol of everything she was determined to reduce me to. And in that moment, the pain vanished. The disappointment evaporated. All the murky, confusing emotions were burned away, leaving behind only a cold, hard, crystalline clarity. Vivian Harrington had crossed a line from which there was no return. And Derek, my husband, through his pathetic, cowardly silence, had held the door wide open for her. My eyes drifted to the small framed photo on my nightstand. It was a black and white picture of Audie Murphy, the most decorated soldier in American history. A sharecropper's son from Texas, small and unassuming, who became a giant through sheer grit and courage. I thought about the silent sacrifices made by generations of soldiers, the quiet dignity they carried, the honor they fought to uphold, often with no expectation of thanks. Vivian hadn't just insulted me, she had spat on that entire legacy. The time for silence was over. The time for keeping the peace was over. To remain passive now would be an act of complicity in my own desecration. It would be a betrayal of every man and woman who had ever worn the uniform that now hung, dishonored, on my closet door. I walked over to the bed and picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Derek's name in my contacts list, but I scrolled right past it. My first call was to a number I'd saved in my phone months ago, under the innocuous heading, Hartford Legal. A small contingency plan I'd hoped I would never need. The second call was to Aunt Margot. Uncle William answered, his voice booming with warmth. Heidi, we were just talking about you. We're so excited to see you in D.C. I'm looking forward to it too, William, I said, my voice as steady and calm as a drill sergeant's on parade. But there's been a slight change of plans. I need the two of you to meet me in Washington a day earlier than we discussed. There's something we need to prepare for. Of course, anything you need. What's going on? I took one last look at the two uniforms hanging on the door. I have a speech to give, I said. And then, right after, I have a battle to win. Standing on that brightly lit stage, in my immaculate dress blues, I looked out over a sea of decorated uniforms and sharp business suits. My eyes found Aunt Margot and Uncle William in the front row. Margot was beaming, her eyes glistening with proud tears, and William was sitting ramrod straight, looking more like a general than a retired accountant. Their presence was a silent, powerful source of strength. I delivered my speech. But as I spoke about military strategy, about finding strength in adversity, about the unbreakable bonds of loyalty forged in the most difficult circumstances, I wasn't just talking to the audience of leaders in front of me. I was talking to myself. Every word I spoke was infused with the private pain and newfound resolve forged in the crucible of the Harrington family. It was more than a speech. It was a reclamation of my own voice, my own power, my own honor. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. The entire auditorium rose to its feet in a standing ovation. As I walked off the stage, a four-star general, a man whose face I'd only ever seen on the news, shook my hand firmly. Captain, he said, his eyes meeting mine with profound respect. That was one of the most inspiring and articulate presentations I've ever had the privilege of hearing. In that moment, under the warm glow of genuine admiration, I felt a powerful reminder of exactly who I was and what I was capable of. The insecure girl from Ohio was gone for good. But there was no time to celebrate. The first phase of the operation was complete, but the main event was still to come. While others headed for the cocktail reception, I took a taxi directly to the Willard Hotel, one of the most historic and powerful addresses in Washington, D.C. I had booked the presidential suite for our meeting, not for the luxury, but for the symbolism. This battle would be fought on neutral ground, in a space that radiated power, a space that was entirely my own. When I arrived, my war council was already assembled. Aunt Margot and Uncle William sat on one of the plush sofas, and at the head of the long conference table sat my lawyer, Ms. Evelyn Davis. Ms. Davis was a formidable woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that came from her years as a top prosecutor in the Army's Judge Advocate General's Corps. She was exactly the ally I needed. In front of her on the polished wood table was a thick, 3-ring binder I had sent her the week before. "This is everything," I said, my voice calm and steady as I took my seat. "Every condescending email, every passive-aggressive text message, and a detailed journal of every incident for the past 3 years. It's all in there." Ms. Davis gave a single, sharp nod, her expression unreadable. "It's more than enough, Captain," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "What we have here is a clear and systematic pattern of behavior." Uncle William looked at the binder, his face etched with a deep, personal pain. "I'm sorry, Heidi," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have spoken up sooner. I saw what was happening, but I stayed quiet. I let my brother and his wife—" I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "It's not too late to speak up now, William," I said gently. "But I'm going to need your help to make this work." The plan was simple, relying on one of the core principles of war we are taught at West Point: surprise. We would use our enemy's own arrogance and assumptions against them. I would be the one to call Derek. I would tell him that an urgent family matter had arisen that required an immediate meeting in D.C. I would be deliberately vague, but would use one specific, irresistible word: legacy. I would tell him the matter directly concerned the Harrington family legacy. I knew Vivian would hear that word and be on the next flight, unable to resist the lure of protecting what she valued most. Phase 2 of the plan required Uncle William. He would call his older brother, my father-in-law, a few minutes after my call to Derek. He wouldn't reveal any details, but he would confirm the gravity of the situation, adding a layer of pressure that would ensure their attendance. The trap was set. The bait was their own greed, their own pride, and their unshakable belief in their own superiority. It worked perfectly. Derek called me back less than 10 minutes after I had left him a message, his voice a mixture of annoyance and anxious curiosity. "Heidi, what the hell is going on?" he demanded. "Uncle William just called Dad and was talking in circles about some serious family issue. Everyone is freaking out." I kept my voice cool and controlled, the same tone I would use on a radio during a tense field exercise. "I can't discuss it over the phone, Derek. It needs to be handled in person. The presidential suite at the Willard Hotel, 10 a.m. tomorrow. All 3 of you need to be here." I knew exactly what they would be thinking. Vivian would assume I'd gotten myself into some kind of trouble, perhaps a financial mess, and was coming to them to beg for a bailout. They would be preparing their lectures, their condescending offers of help. They would walk into that suite tomorrow morning, fully expecting to be in charge, to hold all the cards, to put the little girl from Ohio back in her place once and for all. They would be smug. They would be arrogant. They would be utterly, completely unprepared. They had no idea they weren't coming to a rescue mission. They were walking, willingly and blindly, straight into a perfectly planned ambush. At precisely 10 a.m., the door to the presidential suite opened. Vivian swept in first, dressed in a Chanel suit the color of champagne, her expression a perfect mask of bored irritation. My father-in-law, Richard, followed her, looking uneasy and out of place, his usual corporate confidence completely absent. Derek was last, trailing behind them like a remorseful child. He wouldn't look at me. Vivian's gaze swept across the opulent room, the soaring ceilings, the antique furniture, the panoramic view of the Washington Monument, before landing on me and Ms. Davis, who sat silently at the head of the conference table. A smirk played on Vivian's lips. "Well, this is impressive," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she took a seat opposite us. "What's all this about, Heidi?" Did you decide to sue us because you didn't care for your salad? Richard shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Derek stared intently at the polished surface of the table, his reflection staring back at him. They sat there, radiating an aura of untouchable privilege, fully convinced they had been summoned to put out a small, insignificant fire started by their petulant daughter-in-law. Ms. Davis let the silence hang for a moment before she spoke, her voice as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. Derek. We are here today to discuss what the legal profession refers to as a systematic pattern of behavior, designed to inflict emotional and psychological distress upon my client, Captain Miller. Vivian actually laughed. It was a short, barking sound, utterly devoid of humor. A systematic pattern? Or is it more likely that this girl is just a little too sensitive for her own good? Ms. Davis didn't flinch. Her expression remained as neutral as granite. Let's review the facts, shall we? She said, gesturing to a small digital recorder on the table. We'll begin with Exhibit A, an audio recording of a telephone call made on May 12th, in which Mrs. Harrington, you requested that my client, an active duty captain in the United States Army, serve as unpaid staff at a private charity function. She pressed a button. Vivian's own cool, condescending voice filled the silent room, suggesting I could lend a hand at the check-in table. The smug smirk on the real Vivian's face vanished, instantly replaced by a flash of fury. The color rose in her cheeks. You recorded me, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. Ms. Davis ignored her, her focus unwavering as she picked up a sheet of paper from the binder in front of her. Moving on to Exhibit B, she continued, her tone relentlessly calm. This is a printout of an email from you, Mrs. Harrington, to your sister in Palm Beach. In it, you refer to Captain Miller as, and I quote, the little country mouse from Ohio who doesn't know which fork to use. You go on to say you hope Derek comes to his senses soon. She slid the paper across the table. Vivian stared at it as if it were a snake. And finally, Ms. Davis said, picking up another stack of papers, we have Exhibit C, a series of text message transcripts between you, Mrs. Harrington, and your son, Derek. She looked directly at Derek, who seemed to shrink in his chair. In these exchanges, the two of you repeatedly agree that Captain Miller is not one of us and doesn't belong in your world. There are also several instances of you, Derek, promising my client you would speak to your mother about her behavior, and subsequent messages to your mother in which you apologize for your wife's sensitivity. She pushed the stack of printed messages across the table. It landed with a soft, damning thud. Derek's face went completely white. He looked like he was going to be sick. My father-in-law, Richard, finally looked up, his face a mask of shame, and then slowly lowered his head, staring down at his clasped hands on the table. He had been defeated. But Vivian, cornered and exposed, did what all cornered narcissists do. She attacked. This is ridiculous. It's an ambush, she shrieked, her voice rising with panicked rage. She abandoned all pretense of civility. She's a gold digger. That's all this has ever been about. She married my son for the Harrington name and the Harrington money, and now that she sees she can't control him, she's trying to extort us. She turned her venomous glare on me, her eyes blazing with a desperate, cornered fury. Who do you think you are to pull a stunt like this? She spat. You have nothing. You are nothing. You're just some little soldier girl playing dress-up, and you have no idea who you're dealing with. That accusation, that final desperate insult, was the trigger. It was the last piece of the puzzle, the final move I'd anticipated. My training had taught me never to ask a question in an interrogation unless you already know the answer. Ms. Davis and I hadn't presented this evidence hoping for an apology. We had presented it to provoke a specific reaction. And Vivian had just delivered it, right on cue. It's amazing how people show their true colors when they're backed into a corner, isn't it? They go straight for the jugular, trying to make you feel small and worthless. If you know exactly what that feels like, hit the like button. And if you believe that a person's worth is defined by their character, not their bank account, type "worthy" in the comments below. I looked at Vivian, her face twisted in a mask of ugly rage, and I felt nothing but a cold, clear sense of purpose. It was time to end this. It was time for the final blow. Faced with Vivian's final desperate accusation, "You're just a gold digger. You have nothing." I didn't feel a surge of anger. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. Instead, looking at her face, contorted with a venomous rage born from pure panic, I felt a strange, chilling sense of pity. She was wielding the only weapon she had ever known, the assumption that everyone was motivated by money and status, and she had no idea it was about to backfire spectacularly. I gave a slow, deliberate nod to my lawyer, Ms. Davis. It was time. Ms. Davis, with the calm efficiency of a seasoned prosecutor, reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a single, slim file folder, one they hadn't seen yet. She opened it and slid one piece of paper from it, placing it face down on the table. "Mrs. Harrington," she said, her voice cutting through Vivian's heavy breathing, "you just stated that my client has nothing. Perhaps you should review this document." She pushed the paper across the vast, polished expanse of the conference table. It slid silently, coming to a stop directly in front of Vivian. For a moment, she just stared at it, her chest heaving. Then, with a trembling hand, she snatched it up. It was a single-page summary of financial assets. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted across the page, scanning the columns of numbers. The color drained from her face. She froze, her mouth slightly agape, the paper shaking in her hand. What is this?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "This is impossible." I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the table. I spoke for the first time since the ambush began, and my voice, though quiet, resonated with absolute authority in the dead silent room. "That," I said, my gaze locked on hers, "is the Wallace Trust. It was established by my maternal grandparents. My grandfather was a physicist, one of the original patent holders for fiber optic technology. The trust is currently valued at a little over $50 million, and I am its sole beneficiary." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more profound than any silence I had ever experienced, on or off the battlefield. I could hear the frantic, ragged sound of Vivian's own breathing. My father-in-law, Richard, who had built his life and identity around his financial success, slowly lifted his head, his expression one of utter shock. And Derek? Derek stared at me as if I were a complete stranger, as if the woman he had been married to for 3 years had just revealed herself to be an alien. The foundation of his entire understanding of our relationship, of me, had just crumbled into dust before his eyes. He had spent years watching his mother treat me like a charity case, and he'd never once suspected that I could have bought and sold his entire family 10 times over. I let the weight of that new reality settle upon them. Then I continued, my voice steady and clear. "You see, Vivian, I never needed your money. I never wanted your social standing. The only thing I ever asked for from this family was respect, a seat at the table, a place in the family photos on your marble mantle. But that was the one thing you couldn't bring yourself to give me." Slowly, I pushed my chair back and stood up, feeling a profound sense of lightness, of release. I was no longer their subject, their problem, their project. I was free. "I didn't marry Derek for his money," I said, my voice softening as I turned my gaze to my husband, who still looked utterly broken. "I married him because I fell in love with a man I thought had the courage and integrity to stand by my side. A man who would be my partner." I was wrong. I let the words hang in the air between us. You stood by and let all of this happen. You let her do this. As the weight of my words crushed the last of the Harrington arrogance, Uncle William rose slowly to his feet. He looked at his older brother, his face filled with a lifetime of regret. "She's right, Richard," he said, his voice thick with sorrow. "This is on us, all of it. Years ago, I was in love with Margot. But I was too much of a coward to fight for her against this family's expectations. I let her go, and I have lived with that regret every single day of my life." He then looked at Derek, his eyes pleading, "Don't let your son make the same mistake I did." That heartfelt confession was the final hammer blow. It shattered the last vestiges of their self-delusion. Vivian, the queen of Greenwich society, visibly crumpled in her chair, her face pale, her hands limp in her lap. She had no words left. No more insults, no more defenses. She was just defeated. Derek stared blankly into the middle distance, his face a hollow mask of failure and gut-wrenching, too-late regret. I looked at the three of them one last time, the ruins of the great Harrington family. I felt no triumph, no hatred, only a quiet, profound sense of release. I had stood up for myself, and in doing so, I had taken my life back. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, no one can make you feel inferior without your consent. And I was officially withdrawing my consent, forever. Ms. Davis, I said, turning toward the door, we're done here. I walked out of that room without a backward glance, leaving them to sit amongst the ashes of a dynasty that had just been burned to the ground by its own arrogance. Stepping out of that presidential suite and into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the Willard Hotel, I didn't feel the triumphant thrill of victory I had expected. There was no surge of elation, no desire to celebrate. There was only a profound, hollow emptiness. The adrenaline from the battle, the intense focus that had kept me sharp and steady for the past 24 hours, drained away all at once, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its place. It was the familiar feeling of coming back to base after a long and grueling mission, a sense of relief overshadowed by the sheer weight of what had just happened. Aunt Margot wrapped her arms around me in a fierce, protective hug. She didn't say a word, and I was grateful for her silence. There was nothing to say. Uncle William simply came and stood beside me, placing a large, warm hand on my shoulder. His touch was steady and grounding. We didn't cheer. We didn't exchange victorious glances. We just stood there for a long moment in the opulent hallway, three survivors surveying the wreckage of a storm we had created. The war was over. The battlefield was a mess. I had won, but victory had come at a cost. I had lost a family, even if it was a family that had been poisoning me from the start. It was Margot who finally suggested we get some air. We left the gilded cage of the hotel and walked out into the cool, gray afternoon of Washington, D.C. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain, and it perfectly matched my mood. We walked in comfortable silence for a while, eventually finding ourselves on the National Mall, drawn toward the quiet solemnity of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. We walked slowly alongside the polished black granite wall, its surface reflecting the cloudy sky and our own tired faces. The sheer number of names etched into the stone was overwhelming, a silent testament to battles fought and sacrifices made. "I am so proud of you, Heidi," Uncle William said finally, his voice thick and raspy. He stopped and looked at me, his eyes filled with a sad, profound respect. "You did today what I never had the courage to do. You fought for who you are." Margot squeezed my hand, her grip warm and strong. "You didn't lose a family today, sweetheart," she said softly. "You just pruned the branches that were killing the tree. Your real family is standing right here." I reached out and traced one of the names carved into the cold stone. I thought about all the silent wars people fight every day, the internal battles for dignity and respect that leave invisible scars. Looking at that wall, a strange and unexpected sense of peace began to settle over me. I had fought my war, and I had survived. Just then, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. The screen read, "Derek." A part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the call go to voicemail and disappear from his life forever. But another part, the part that needed closure, compelled me to answer. I took a deep breath and swiped the screen. "Heidi!" His voice was shattered, broken into 1,000 pieces. It was the voice of a man who had lost everything and knew it. "Heidi, I am so sorry. Oh God, I am so sorry. I was blind. I was a coward." He started to cry then. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ragged, wrenching sobs that tore through the phone. It was the sound of a hollow man, a man whose entire world had been built on a foundation of lies and who was now standing in the rubble. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer comfort, but I didn't offer anger either. The rage had burned itself out, leaving only a deep, profound sadness in its wake. This was the man I had loved, the man I had built a life with, and he was a stranger to me now. "Can you give me a chance?" he begged, his voice choked with desperation. "Just one chance to make it right? I'll do anything. We can go to counseling, therapy, anything you want. I'll change. I swear I'll change." I took a long, slow breath, my eyes focused on my own reflection in the polished black wall. I saw a woman I hadn't seen in a long time, a woman who looked tired, yes, but also strong, resolute, free. I was finally listening to my own voice, the one that had been silenced for so long, the voice of self-respect I had fought so hard to win back. "Derek," I said, and I was surprised by how steady and clear my voice was. "I don't know what the future holds. I honestly don't." I wasn't trying to be cruel, I was just being honest. But what I do know, right now, is that I need space. I need time to just be me again. Not the person your mother wanted me to be, not even the person you wanted me to be, just me. I wasn't slamming the door on our marriage, but I wasn't leaving it open either. I was taking back control of the threshold. "Goodbye, Derek," I said softly. And then I ended the call. It wasn't an act of revenge. It wasn't a final twist of the knife. It was an act of self-preservation. It was the first, quiet step on the long road to rebuilding a life. Not on their terms, but on mine. A year has passed since that day in the Willard Hotel. I'm standing in the backyard of my own home now, breathing in the sweet scent of freshly cut grass and blooming hydrangeas. It's not a sprawling mansion in Connecticut. It's a cozy, welcoming colonial house in a quiet suburb of Virginia. Close enough to DC for me to continue my work at the Pentagon, but far enough to feel like a sanctuary. From the porch, I can hear the happy squeals of my 6-month-old daughter, Grace. Aunt Margot is pushing her gently on the wooden swing set, her laughter mingling with the baby's, while Uncle William stands nearby, making silly faces. They moved to a smaller house just 10 minutes away a few months ago. They aren't visitors. They're Grandma Margot and Grandpa Will. They are, in every sense of the word, family. Inside, hanging proudly above the fireplace, is a large, beautiful portrait of Grace, right next to a photo from my wedding. A new wedding photo. From the kitchen, I can hear the sizzle of onions and peppers in a hot pan. Derek is in there, wearing a navy blue apron with the words, "The Captain's Chef," embroidered in gold thread. He's making his famous fajitas for our Sunday lunch. Our road back to each other was not easy. It wasn't a Hollywood movie montage where one apology fixed everything. It was 6 long, hard months of intensive therapy, both separately and together. It was countless difficult conversations that stripped away years of denial and painful truths. But he did the work. He learned to finally draw a firm, unshakable boundary with his mother. A few months after our confrontation, he walked away from his high-paying job at the family firm and started his own financial consulting business, building something that was entirely his. He fought to win me back, not with grand promises, but with small, consistent, daily actions. He showed up. He listened. He took responsibility. He proved his loyalty day after day, until I could finally trust him again. He earned his place back at my table. We rarely speak of Vivian. After that day, she and Richard separated. He moved into a quiet condo in Florida and, from what William tells me, seems more at peace than he has been in years. Vivian is still the queen of her castle in Greenwich, but it's an empty kingdom now. Her heirs are gone. Every few weeks, an absurdly expensive and impersonal gift for Grace will arrive from a high-end department store, a cashmere blanket, a Tiffany silver rattle, but she never calls. She never visits. In the end, she won the house, but she lost the home. Her fate doesn't bring me any joy, only a quiet sense of peace that the world in its own way had balanced the scales. Justice had been served. Earlier this year, I used a portion of my inheritance to establish a nonprofit organization, the Wallace Foundation, named for my parents. We provide college scholarships for the children of veterans, helping to give them the same opportunities that my own blue-collar parents sacrificed everything to give me. I've learned that true wealth isn't about having a massive trust fund. It's about what you do with it. It's about building something that will outlast you. Later tonight, when I lay Grace down in her crib, I know I'll stand there for a moment, just watching her breathe, her tiny face so peaceful in the soft glow of the nightlight. And I'll think about this incredible, painful, transformative journey. For years, I believed my most important battles would be fought on some dusty, faraway battlefield. I was wrong. The most important battle I ever fought was the one for respect in my own home. I've learned that honor isn't just something you wear on a uniform, it's the boundary you refuse to let anyone cross. I've learned that love isn't about silent endurance, it's about active protection. And I've learned, with absolute certainty, that family isn't about the blood you share, but about the people who fight in the trenches alongside you. And you, the person listening to my story right now, are you fighting a battle of your own? Are you sitting at a table where you feel invisible, unheard, or unloved? Please remember this. You are worthy of a seat at the table, always. Thank you for taking this journey with me. My battle for a seat at the table is over, but I know that for many of you, your stories are still being written. This is what our community is all about. Sharing stories of strength, finding our voices, and reminding each other that we are not alone. If my story moved you, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week, we share a new journey of someone who found the courage to fight back. I would be honored to read about your own moments of strength in the comments below.